Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint, Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Orla and I'm delighted to be joined by Mark Kashman from Microsoft, who'll be talking to you today about Microsoft Lists and Teams using SharePoint. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC22. Don't forget to check out the Resource Centre. This is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit sharepointeurope.com and click the content link at the top. Continue your learning by joining us tomorrow, May the 18th, for a webinar with Ahmed Najer titled Intelligent Lists and Libraries. For full details, check out sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. ESPC 22 returns live and in person in Copenhagen from the 28th of November to the 1st of December. Save €300 on your ESPC ticket with our super early bird sale. Act fast as this offer ends Friday. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any question you have in the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Centre, where you'll be notified by email when it's available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our presenter, Mark. Hello, Mark.
Good morning, Orla, and thank you very much. I will switch over so hopefully everybody can see. Orla, if you can let me know, I can see audio, video is working.
Everything looks good. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you for having a SharePoint week. It was a pleasure to be invited. And I was really pleased to see that we've got 5 days. And I know the next session tomorrow, the one that goes a lot deeper into lists, I'm excited for that one, purely to see how lists plus AI comes to fruition. I know a lot of what we do in the product, but I'll be really interested in that presentation.
Well,
So again,
brilliant. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you for hosting the week. And I'll have to admit, when you first sent me the invitation, I thought it was Shark Week. So I thought I maybe had to design my lists and pages with Shark, but it's SharePoint Week. So I think we can work. Maybe we can divide the difference and make it Shark Point Week and come back with a bunch of shark themed lists and pages.
Good idea. Maybe next year.
Maybe next year. Okay. So the goal of today is to really show you a lot of what you can do within Microsoft Teams in the context of using lists and pages, both of which are stored in SharePoint. So we're really wanting to highlight the value of how you can work with content, whether it's a list or a page, in the context of Teams where you're going to do a lot of collaboration. And a lot of that is just to have the content referenced closer to where you and your peers are working at a one-to-one level in a in a chat context or in a broader team context. But mostly everything we're focusing here is that inner loop, or the people who are working together one-to-one, one-to-few, day-to-day, working on getting projects completed, working on events like today to get them completed and getting them ready to go live. And I just want to highlight sort of the value of each individual component. What is Microsoft Lists? What is Microsoft Teams? Of course, what is SharePoint? But really the value and the breadth of the session will be how do they come together to help you get work done and stay more connected, both people and content. So as we move through, I first want to start out with a couple of numbers, which really are numbers to say thank you. There's a lot that the product has evolved in the last year or two. But really, it's been a journey of a number of years, and SharePoint has been at the core of the Office 365 experience for a long time, and now heavily contributes to the success that we're seeing with Microsoft Teams. And the more people that use it refine how we build it, and of course, a lot of feedback refines on what we build. And so we're very pleased to see that a lot of people are getting a lot of value and benefit working together in teams, having meetings like today, but also to see that there are same, if not a significant amount of activity in SharePoint itself from a sites perspective, with new active sites per month and seeing this grow year over year. At the core of bringing together 270 million people on Teams, with the growth of sites, it's really the content in the sites that we're going to focus on today. So beyond 8 million sites, there are many millions, if not into the billions, of collective amount of content, whether it be files, pages, lists. But you're seeing all of this evolve into innovative experiences, two of which I want to focus on, which are the experiences that SharePoint is at the core underpinning, but the value is, you see here on the left and the middle on the bottom row, the list experience in Teams and the pages experience in Teams. And that's mostly what I'm going to talk about when we get to demo. But to really highlight the value of the SharePoint platform, powering all these different experiences across Yammer, Stream, Teams, Lists, OneDrive, and of course, some new experiences that are coming that we've recently announced, which is the new Pages experience inside of Teams to be able to create and edit from within Teams. Today, we're at the availability of being able to edit a SharePoint page in Teams, but now you can create lists and edit them, and soon you'll be able to create and edit pages. But just to step back for a second, there's a real value of what we're doing to build so that these products are coming together to the benefit of how people are working together, and that there really is this digital fabric that are connecting people, whether they're meeting like we are today, on camera, sharing content, presentations, working and collaborating on a number of different materials, whether that's working on a project deliverable, like a contract for a client, or a blog post that you're working on to be a part of your digital campaign to announce what you're doing. You're always bringing a lot of people together, working in different facets of the company and working on different parts and pieces of a project, a lot of which just works to have and require a lot of coordination, a lot of collaboration. And as I mentioned, oftentimes it's bringing together people and content. And if those people are disparate and if they're spread across the world, that's okay. If they work in different parts of the company and they need, a little bit of access or they need a lot of access, you can control and manage that. So from an IT perspective, there is a lot of governance that you can put on how people work together for the sake of security and privacy and the ways that your projects may be more or less locked down. But in essence, when it comes to working with people, our front door that we offer within Microsoft 365 is often Microsoft Teams. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today falls within the collaborative space. But if you know Teams and you've used it similar to with GoToWebinar, it is often used to hold meetings, whether those are one-to-one meetings, one-to-few, or broad all-hands, multi-thousand people meetings. You can certainly do that, obviously, day-to-day, whether it's email or chat. Teams is coming into the fold to be able to support that for a one-to-one or a team chat, calling to replace your voice mechanism or your physical phone. For me, in the center, I've been on a soft phone or a digital phone, whether it was Skype or now Teams, for 10 plus years. So even though a long time ago when I joined Microsoft, I had a physical phone and it would get set up for me each time I would move into a new office, now the phone is just with me wherever I go, in addition to all of this capability, whether it's on my mobile device, whether I'm on my desktop, whether you are on a PC or a Mac, or straight through the web. If you need to sign in, you're at a hotel and you go to a business station, you can sign in and get access to all of your calls, your meetings, but to really then get into that value of being able to get to your content and the people that you work with the most often. And sometimes, hopefully, you automate a lot of this. There are a number of projects that I work on that are ongoing, and we've automated some of the simple things to be able to send out reminders, to be able to automate a review and approval process, and again, to be able to do that and not leave the context of Teams so that I can stay in the flow of what I'm doing. Alongside that, just to get a little bit of a 101 of what is Microsoft Teams? Well, what is Microsoft Lists? Microsoft Lists, if you've been with SharePoint for a while, being SharePoint Week, at its core, it is a SharePoint list, but it has evolved, and it's evolved in place. So if you've had any lists for the last 5 or 10 years in SharePoint in the cloud, they are now getting a lot more new functionality. But if you're new to lists today, I hope to encourage you to try to create your own first list. Whether that's a list in Teams, you can now create a list in Teams. You can create a list in SharePoint. You can create a list on your mobile device, whether that's iOS or Android. And when you go to create your list, a lot of the work that we've done in the last 2 years is to make them more simple, a lot more smart and a lot more flexible. And in the simple context, a lot of it is around the user interface. There's a home for all your lists now. That's the Lists app in Microsoft 365. You have the ability to create a list essentially from anywhere, wherever you're working. Now we've got it in the SharePoint app bar. If you're a SharePoint user and you're on a SharePoint site and you have the need to create a list, you can go in and instantiate the create list experience right from the new SharePoint app bar create experience. If you're in Teams, I will show you that today. If you're on a mobile device, you can create a new list from a template just as you would from anywhere. And there's a lot more places. Even office.com has a create list experience. So we've worked hard to get a lot of the entry points available to you. The UI is much more friendly, a lot fewer clicks to get things done. But when it comes to being smart, we want to give you a lot of flexibility in how you can add reminders and rules, how you can work with color formatting and have that be some of that be automated and applied in the way of when the status or a element of the list item changes, so too does the color to indicate what's going on. So we want to give you a tool that helps you track what matters most in the context of your work without a limit of how many lists you can create, without a list of what you can do, but really giving you the flexibility to get your work done in the context of where you work with others. And last is just a start of where we're starting to move in SharePoint pages in Teams. We announced at Ignite that you'll have the ability to create a page in SharePoint. We're not quite there yet, but already today, what I will show you is the ability to edit a page, and we'll kind of step through what it'll look like if you were to create a new page. I've got a little bit of a cheat workaround to show you the intent of what we're working on. But with SharePoint pages in Teams, you have this ability to bring a lot of context together. So you can bring in a PowerPoint alongside a video with a list on it that also maybe points to additional resources and have that be all on a single page. That single page being a SharePoint page, but the experience in SharePoint. And if you think about these as mini dashboards, it really gives you that value of being able to have a lot more information and a lot of the storytelling capabilities without requiring people to jump to multiple tabs. So bring it in, tell your story, what it is you want to get across on the page, and have a really nice expanse of the type of content that you can bring in, but have it be a relatively nice, consistent experience, fluid, whether you're working on the mobile aspect of Microsoft Teams, whether you're on the web, or if you go to SharePoint directly, you can certainly see that page and access it in no problem. So I wanted to move away from talking about the technology, and before I dive in to really spend most of the time from here on to show you in demo a lot of what this technology is and how it works in Teams, and of course some scenarios that you can kind of hopefully get a sense of what's going on. I wanted to pause just before we started the demo. Orla, I know it's a bit early if there are any questions, but if there's anything that's come through before I start demo, I'd love to address them before we move on.
Not as yet, Mark. So just to let you know, guys, you can write a question at any point and we will ask Mark to answer them, but there's nothing coming yet.
Okay, all right, well, thank you. The first thing I wanted to do is I've said a couple of things about a couple of different products. You probably know by your interest coming to the session today, but I just wanted to ground where we're at. I'm in my Microsoft 365 tenant. If you've only invested in Office 365, it's the same thing. I'm essentially looking at Office 365 in the context of a Microsoft 365 investment. And the way that I can tell is if I pop open the app launcher, which you've probably seen a lot, the areas that I'm going to focus on is I will certainly be talking about Microsoft Teams. I'll be talking about Microsoft Lists, and I'll be talking about SharePoint from a pages perspective. And so all of these ways to navigate from app to app to app, I'm going to show you a little bit more on what all of that looks like inside of Microsoft Teams. But I first just wanted to show you where these apps live. Obviously, they are apps in of themselves, but that they all have a deep integration and a connective tissue with inside Microsoft Teams. So I'm essentially right now in SharePoint, and I'm on a site that is called the Next Gen Events site. And if I hover over that, I can see there's about 267 people here at Microsoft that work in this space. There's about 163,000 people at Microsoft. but I can see that in this team site, there are this many numbers. I can see who, I can see the apps that we have available to us. Obviously, SharePoint is where I'm at right now, and I can drill in and I can do a number of things with this site. The other thing, just as a kind of a fun note, is this site, Next Gen Events, is a part of a hub site. So the hub site is called NGCS, which stands for Next Gen Content Services. And all that means is that's a parent level to those 263 people. This one has a lot more people at Microsoft working together, but not still everybody. So it's still a smaller unit. We call it a hub site because it now has multiple sites of which you can see different events that we work with, different resources that we have and we want to point people to, some of the things that we publish and places that we want to draw people's attention to. And I only say this because everything that I'm going to be talking about from a content perspective is under this container. It's within this hub site inside of this Next Gen Events team site. So I'll have kind of a proof point where if you know the site contents page, we'll go there next just to show you where this all technically lives, because that's a common question. When I create a list in Teams, where does it get created? I will do that creation and you will see where it gets created. But just have in the back of your mind, it gets stored in SharePoint. And if you really need to get to the core of where something is stored, or if you're IT and you're wondering, how do I manage it? Or can I manage it? Can I control it? It's a page just like any other. It's a list like any other. And in fact, the site is a site like any other. But the experience is a lot of what we've changed, and I hope you get a lot of value out of seeing that. But just keep in the back of your mind the site contents page. I'll turn to that just to show you where all of this lives so that you can answer that question. If you're on IT, in IT, or you get asked that question, it is a component in SharePoint, especially when you create new, gets created where it should be. So this is SharePoint, and that's interesting, but let's take a look at lists, and then I'm really going to show you how this all comes together in Teams. So if I click on the Lists app from that app launcher, I'm taken to what we call the Lists app in Microsoft 365, or Lists Home. And this is a home for all of my lists. It doesn't look anything like SharePoint. In fact, it doesn't look like anything in Microsoft 365 because it's its own application. And it gives me a landing place where I can see my favorite lists. Anything that I pin up here by clicking on the star will appear in my favorites. And I can do that from within the list itself. So it appears here as I navigate from list to list. And I can also see all of my recent lists. That gives me a couple ways to pivot if I want to see recent lists or just ones that I've put in my personal space. We call that my lists. Those are stored in similar to OneDrive, where if I create a file in OneDrive, it's my file until I share it. If I create a list in my list, it's a list only available to me until I share it. Different from a team space that if I go into the recent, you'll see now I have lists that are coming from a lot of different team spaces. This one is for the show that I manage called The Intrazone. It's a podcast. I manage Microsoft List as a product manager, so I have a lot of our future features that we're working on with my engineering peers. And then this one is where I track the different sessions that I'm involved in. And I'll show you just like I did so that I got ready for today. I actually had this as an entry as a future session that I was working on. And I use lists to keep it all organized for me because I always track the date, what's coming up. If I click into an individual item, you can see I've used some customization. So we support the ability to customize your list forms. But the proof point here is it's a list that helps me keep track of my sessions. This is the session that we're on today. I've actually programmed it so that when the date equals today to show it as blue, and when it's a date in the future to show it as yellow. And if it's something that's already passed, then I don't even see it at all because I've created a view on this list that says don't show me past events. I can switch to a view that shows all. But you can see I've grabbed a little bit of custom JSON that is coming from our community to make my list a little bit more interesting in the header. And I've created a link here in the footer that takes me to my LinkedIn page. So if I share this with anybody as a collaborator who becomes a co-presenter, they can go and learn more about the session. They can go learn more about me. But for me, it's just a way for me to keep organized. And it's a really simple list that I've created, but it's only available to me. So if I jump back to Microsoft Lists, I'm going to jump into two other lists so you can see a little bit around what you do with lists. This is the one that I mentioned earlier where I use Lists to track shows that we have coming up. Today we published a new episode of the Interzone called Get Schooled with Viva Learning. And I used Lists in the side of Teams, I'll show you what that looks like, to work with just a few people. There's about 7 people that work on the podcast. And we work on refining the title, the date that we've confirmed of when we're going to publish, and then we keep track of some of the lightweight metadata, who are our guests, and then eventually I add the link to the blog when I have time to add that. But as you can see here, I did some of that work with the date field and some of the custom formatting that I use to just give me a sense of a little bit of separation, so it's easier to look at this list and I can drill in and I can see that, yep, that's today. We've published a new episode today, and I'll fill in that metadata. I'll do that when I get into Teams. So that's a little bit about SharePoint pages. It's a little bit about lists. The last list that I wanted to show you, which is really to show you one of the new features, so that you can see there's a breadth of how you can set up your pages, set up your lists from a view perspective. And here we have a couple of items in a board view. And think about this as a way to change the status and look at columns more from a as status changes. Might want to move things around. So if we're working on the onboarding process and we're trying to determine when to have lunch for the team as we onboard new people. So we're a small team, we manage this ourselves. We created a board view of these different activities, and maybe it's on the first day where we want to have lunch. I drag this over, and what changes is the metadata and of course the visual. So I added it where it says complete by first day. If I move it to after 30 days, if you watch where it says first day, the metadata gets changed because that choice field has another selection which is called after 30 days. And if I move it around, that's actually what's changing. But visually, I'm just moving it from left to right. And I can do that freely at any time to move items around. Metadata is getting updated, and I'm using the board view to get my work done as status changes. And I can automate some of the things that what happens when I move it from first day to week 1. That might trigger an email reminder to somebody who managed all of week 1 to then know that now office assignment has moved into their charge. So that's board view. And another view that we have, just so you can see it, is calendar view. And the one that I use the most in calendar view is when we talk about different events that are coming up. And like today, we're having a new event on May 6th, 17th, so I'm just going to add it. So in calendar view, you can even add new items. So we'll call this SharePoint week. And we'll use the date today. We're online. And I'm just going to fill in a couple of pieces of metadata. Myself, I'm the contact, so I can do a people lookup. And we'll just have one more note that working with the ESPC crew is awesome. So obviously there's a number of different fields that require some entry. I'll save us some time and just enter that new item. And now you see on May 17th, I've got a new what technically is a list item, but a new entry in our calendar. And if I navigate from month to month, if I look ahead and if I look behind, you can see that these are all just list items that are commonly seen in a row or a grid view. But using calendar view, I can see it more clearly. When is Teams Nation? It was on March 23rd. And if I go ahead and skip forward, you can see it's very responsive and it looks like a calendar. So there's a number of different views that you can use, and there's a lot of ways to navigate how you get from your list to list. The last thing I want to show you before we switch into the Teams user interface, just to give you a sense of the what is lists, and then we'll move on to actually using them, is when you go to create a new list. This is the new create list experience, and you can start in a lot of different ways. I will often start in blank when I have a very simple list that I need to create, add a couple of columns, and then move on. If I have data that maybe I have in Excel but will work better in lists, I can import that table data from Excel. I can also use the smarts from an existing list. And this just makes it so that if I've done work on a list to add rules, to create formatting that I really like, to add the right columns that I'm using to track the information, I can start and use that effectively like an ad hoc template. And so if I use the from existing list, it'll use the smarts of another list Won't carry over the content, but it'll often save me a lot of time. But really the value that we've introduced with List is this ability to use templates. So you can do this when you create a list in a mobile device, when you create it here like I'm doing in the web, and I'll show you the create experience in Teams. It's the same experience, but the value here is as you click in to use a template, you get a little bit of a peek ahead of what does this list look like. It has different columns, it has different choice fields that are pre-populated and colors are already chosen for you. It's all the ability to customize this after the fact exists, of course, so that if you want to change your list, you can. And of course, adding or removing columns to whatever you think is appropriate. So I'll say yes, I want to use this template, and we'll do, since we were joking with Share Shark Week, we'll add that as our new list. And since sharks often sometimes draw a little red color in the sea, and we will do this as, let's see, this is just a silly game. So this is where I just wanted to show you when you go to create a list, if you're not inside Teams, you can choose where you want to create it, either as a My List, which is where it keeps it personal until you share it, or share it to a team space that you often work in. So the recent one that I've been showing you is Next Gen Events. So we can create this list in Next Gen Events. We can show it in the site navigation or not, like any other SharePoint piece of content. And I'll go to click create. And this is pretty straightforward. It sets up the columns for me. I have the ability now to add it to my favorites by clicking the star. And if I want to, I can even adjust this name if I want to add an element or two. Again, I'll show you really quickly about adding a new week. We'll just call this one JAWS 2.0. And the session code is ouch. And the session type is a workshop since we're getting used to this one. I'll add one of my peers, Bill Bear, as one of our speakers. Sorry, he's spelling his name differently because we now have two Bill Bears inside of Microsoft. And we'll give him the start date of next week on the 26th. And we'll end it there. We're going to make him do it at midnight. And we'll have this in Las Vegas. So when I click save, you'll see that a lot of the formatting is already there. The choices were pre-filled out for me, and I can get work done very quickly by creating a new list and starting to add content. And now the intent would be that I start to invite people to complete the list item or to add their own list items. But if I go back to Microsoft Lists, I can see I have a new list pinned here. And in fact, if I want to customize this with a little fun, I can go in here and even add something like an emoji, a shark emoji, click save, and now I've got this updated. So the value is I've added a new list to the work that I'm doing, and where that list exists is in the right space for me to access and for other members of my team to be able to access as well. So I'm going to pause here because we're going to switch into Teams and really review how it all comes together in Teams, showing you a couple of scenarios and how to create and use this different technology inside of Teams. But again, Orla, I want to pause. I've showed a little bit around SharePoint and Pages, a little bit of lists in the context of the Lists app. And were there any questions that came up just based on some of the early demos?
Yeah, we have a few questions in now. So we have seen in the last years a lot of application coming out in the Microsoft 365 environment. Which is the main difference between To-Do, Planner, and Lists? How should we explain to use the correct use case for each one of these tools?
Sure. So there's a great article if you want to dive a little bit deeper in the tech community that dives into that space that we call the collaborative work portfolio. And it's a great question. It's a question that I get a lot. And if you think about Planner, and just to give you a visual, here's Planner. If you think about To-Do, there's To-Do. And if you think about List, there's List. If you think about it just from a, I want to manage my tasks perspective, that's where the confusion comes from. So if I'm in To-Do, the focus of To-Do is really to focus on your personal tasks. And for me, I use To-Do all the time. Today is one of my tasks. I had it listed. I have an events task list, and I have it managed where anything that I want to track as a subtask, I do that in task or in To-Do because it's my individual way to track what am I doing. I get a nice everyday experience of what I need to work on. And in fact, if I dragged in my to-do here, I can show you. This is how I have it set up. Here is the webinar, and I've broken it down with some of the things that I want to remember, to tweet about it, to make sure I reach out to Ella before we refine the final title. And this is everything I do to get ready for the event. But within the event, there are a lot of things that I can't do. I can't track, hundreds of items and have it tied to a business process. If I want to track physical assets, that's a little bit harder to do in To-Do. We have one of our medium-sized customers up north, the company that makes the bobbleheads called Funko. They use Lists to track the physical trucks as they go from the different warehouses, and in that context, they track all of the pallets of all of the boxes. So they use List to manage the trucks themselves. Is the truck in a good state? Is it out for repair? Who is the driver? Is there a device where they use to check all the pallets in and out? Those are Android devices. And that's all managed within a single list connected to other lists. So when I think about adding things to business process, customizing the form, really leveraging the list to do a lot of things beyond tasks, tracking physical data, physical information, tracking process, tracking maybe an onboarding process, I would do that with lists when it gets to be a little bit more custom and a little bit more complex. Now, where Planner comes in is I think it's a little bit of easier if you understand the difference of a list is not a task app, but Planner is a task app, and it's really meant to help you manage team projects. And help you manage through the different assignments that people get. And when they're done, they're usually out of sight. And if you think about with lists, oftentimes it's ongoing information. I have 30 devices that I manage for my team, and I've got 3 that are out for repair. I've got 10 that are assigned to different team members, and I maybe have 5 or 6 that are unassigned. And as I assign them to people as they join the team, I add who that person is, and I make it that it's been assigned. And I can automate that. Maybe if I choose something and I change the status of that device to be out for repair, that might mean that it actually gets triggered to be a ticket assigned in a third-party system that actually is going to then pick up the device, get it repaired, and return it, and maybe then even update it that it's been repaired and it's available for checkout. But if you think about it from a task perspective, they all look a little similar. But once you get beyond task and you're tracking information, physical assets, events, onboarding, people, contacts, a lot of that is where List comes into play.
Thanks, Mark. One more question. I would like to know when will we be able to reduce the height of the top banner on a SharePoint page? It's very tall and there's no flexibility in terms of height.
Yeah, I'll show you the options that you have today, and I'll tell you also it's been something that the team has heard a lot of feedback and in fact has iterated through a couple of times. So this is just the default view. I created a blank page and you'll see why in a second. But if I go into that page and I go into the edit web part, which is effectively editing the top, you'll see I have the couple of different things that I can do in the title area, and I can change the layout. I don't have an image yet, but I can change the layout to have the title overlay the image. I can have it be plain, which makes it a lot smaller. So hopefully that's part of what you're looking to get accomplished. So that brings up and minimizes the white space. This is the biggest one, so it goes against what you're asking. But if I have it as a color block, it expands and expects that you maybe have a large graphic that you really want to highlight. But if I go into plain and I minimize some of the things that show, so if I don't want to show you some things, if I started to type in some text, you'll see where it starts to show up like that. This is about as minimal as we have. And a lot of the feedback is I want it to be even smaller, if even non-existent. And that's an area of investment. I don't have anything more to share as far as timing, but they really are looking at how can we minimize it down to almost no header, where you're not even seeing any of the tooling if you don't want it to appear. You don't even see the title, you'll just get directly into the content. And when I show you what this page looks like in Teams, hopefully you'll get a sense of the direction that we're going. because some of what we do in Teams does that automatically already today. So I'll point that out when we get there. But know that you have options. Obviously, not every page needs to be as maximum as we have it, and hopefully some of the options will get it a little bit smaller than maybe you were aware of.
Okay, that is great. Thank you. We'll just do one final one. There's a few coming in, but could you remind me of how to get to the board view, please? Would you mind going through that once more?
Yeah. So if I go into lists, and this is board view, in lists, obviously I've got a number of different list views that I've created, but with board view, you actually have to create it. If you didn't have it yet, you have to create it. So let me go to all items, and you can see this list is pretty simple, but oftentimes when you create a list, it'll create it and have a couple of views, but board view and calendar view are ones that you need to create. So if you go into all items now, and you go into create new view, click create new view, and we'll just say new board. And you'll see here we have the different view types. You can always create multiple views. You can create multiple types of views. You can have multiple boards, multiple gallery views, multiple calendars, but you'll see here now you should see the new ability to create a board view. You just click on board, and then you have to just choose one column that will be what it works off of. You'll see how it creates it. So we'll just go organize it by completed by. So it chooses the different choice fields. We don't need to make this one public because I'll probably delete it later. But if I go in to create it, you'll see this looks very similar to what I already demoed. But if you notice, it's the new board versus the previous board. And it's just that simple. You can do it on pretty much any list with a choice field. And it's just that little bit you have to go to create a new view, like you create any new view. And you have to create a board view or a calendar view. Some of the views get auto-created based on a template, but with board view and calendar view, it's a proactive creation.
Thanks, Mark.
You're welcome. So great questions, especially the one around planner, to-do, and lists. It is the most recurring question I get. And a lot of it is, I think, more from a look and feel. Once you start using lists, and especially if you go beyond using it with a task perspective in mind, you'll immediately see I use lists to track a podcast, to track and manage different features on the roadmap, to track different events, to track my individual sessions, to track physical assets, and of course to track what we're doing here with SharePoint Week, Shark Week. So thank you for the questions, and I think we'll now switch context so that we can see what does this all look like in the context of where I collaborate. And often where I collaborate these days is in Microsoft Teams, and that's where I'm at now. And the reason I wanted to show you the parts and pieces before we really show you it all coming together is everything I just showed you I can do inside of Teams. The one caveat is today we don't have the ability to create a page, but I'm going to kind of cheat and show you how to do that in the way that we're thinking about designing it. But where I'm at is I'm in Teams, and I'm in my instance of Teams, so I'm logged in. I have access to a couple of different Teams tenants. I'm in the Microsoft tenant now. And I am in a specific team. That one that we talked about that has the SharePoint site connected to it is called Next Gen Events. And I'm in a channel that I've pinned called ESPC 2022. And hopefully you'll get a sense of why. But I have a lot of different teams that I am a part of. And this is the one, if you look at it in full, I've got the Next Gen Events team, and I've got about 25 different channels, some that are hidden from view, not because I want to hide them, but because I want to just have fewer of just only the events that I'm working on. But all I've done is I've pinned one specific channel up here, and that's where I'm going to be working. So in this space, I want to show you just a few things that I've got already pre-populated that are based on the work that I'm currently doing with the ESPC team for the November event. And we're going to add one item because we know one thing that's already missing. But if I go into the list that I've already created, and I'm working currently with just about 5 or 6 people, soon we'll open this up to about 30 or 40 people here at Microsoft that will be delivering sessions at ESPC. But already I have a couple of sessions that Kathy has submitted to the team, and so we're tracking them here. I want to expand this a little bit. So in any tab you can expand so that you can see more content. And if you notice, I'm just seeing the list here. I'm not in SharePoint technically from a view perspective, but I am accessing the content that's in SharePoint. This is a list as a tab in Teams. And in fact, it's the list that we're using to manage for the sessions that my group will be presenting in Copenhagen. So let's create a new one. And I think it'll be a fun one. I won't enter all the details here, but let's just call this Hybrid Work Innovation. And our speaker is going to be Jeff Teeper. And so there's Jeff. The session type is going to be a keynote. We don't know the room yet, unless Orla, you've got a room to let me know about. But we'll work on that. It's going to be a physical room.
Not at this point.
Not at this point, but we'll call it a physical room. Maybe we'll call it 6A. How about that? He'll be in 6A. The link will be eventually, once it's live, as a session that people can look at. We always track that so we can share it via social. I'll be working on the abstract, so I'll say coming soon. And some of the notes might be, who is going to be as co-presenter, who's going to be speaking with. The date we know is in November, and we'll put Jeff on, let's see, November 9th. And correct me if I'm getting the date in my head, I can't remember exactly. But let's make this an allocation from the OneDrive and SharePoint team. This is in draft currently, session code. We'll just make this keynote 100, and it's not yet been submitted. So this is all the details that we track internally. You can certainly track a lot more. And when I save it, we should now have a third item. But if you notice, because it's listed as a keynote, that this item actually shows up as yellow. And that's because I've already programmed it. Anything that gets listed as a keynote overrides anything and becomes yellow. If I go into Kathy's session and I actually choose where this allocation is coming from, and I look at her title, and I know that it happens to be about SharePoint, I'm going to make that a OneDrive and SharePoint session. And I did that to show you that I've got some color coding on the back end that are available to me once I switch some things. I don't have to choose the color green. I just go in and it chooses it for me based on this allocation field. So if I choose this one to be an allocation for Teams, guess what color it's going to show up? And as we start to have more sessions, I think we're going to have probably around 15 or 20 sessions total from our team of Microsoft-led sessions from the OneDrive and SharePoint team, but I'll also be working across the Teams team and the Power Platform team. And it just makes it more visual, and I'm doing all this work inside of Teams. So Orla, there will be a lot more sessions coming. If you can let Sarah know, we're working on that right now, working with Caruana and team. But for me, it's a place where I can then go in and work. And in fact, if I want to, I can go back to this session and I can start a conversation with Jenny, who is a person on Jeff's team. And I'm just letting her know this is where we're going to be putting Jeff's final abstract. And so I'm starting a conversation that's connected to this list item, and I'm just going to put in #demo so that she knows when I post this. And what it does a couple of things. It binds the conversation on the right with this individual list item on the left. The experience is inside Teams. You can see that it's an unfinished list item, and that soon Jenny and I are going to work on Jeff's abstract. To the rest of the team, in the posts, you can see that in the ESPC 2022 channel, Jenny now got a notification. She can see the context of this ask or this work item. And for her, if I were to be Jenny, clicking into this list item takes her right into the list item with the conversation open. If she wants to reply to me or start working on the list item, she has the access she needs, and we're having the content and the conversation side by side. So that's a pretty straightforward way of working with lists and list items and the value that having your list in Teams brings. I hope that's a pretty straightforward example. You can always go back to the list, add new items, start to automate some things by adding rules, working with Power Apps. There's a lot that you can do once you have your list started, which is where I want to turn to next to show you a little bit around how do you get started with a list in Teams, really to get to this state here. So I'm going to go into the create experience and create 2 new lists, and I'm going to use the lists app, and you can see it's among all the other different apps that you've probably already used or tried out, as a tab app in Teams, there's now a Lists app in Teams. Just click on Lists, and basically you're starting to say, I want this list to be a tab in Teams. So I'll save it down, and we'll create this one. Right now it's just called Lists, and I'm going to create a list the second time. This first time I'm going to go in and add an existing list. So we talked about the ESP sessions. There it is. Shark Week list, that's our new one. That's that. But I'm just going to bring in one from a previous event so I can show you what that looks like. And this is something that we just recently did here in Seattle. And when I bring this in, you'll see that this list has all of those sessions and all of the details filled out. If I want to expand this to be a little bit bigger, you can see that here are all the different sessions that we just delivered in Seattle. I can see the view count. We had 29 sessions. We had a keynote from Jeff, that's yellow. And if I scroll over to the right, all of the details that are now in there are when is the session, what room is it in, we have all those details. And each team can come to this list to know when that's all available to them. We had a different number of people that were working with the event team to get that information, and of course, it's now trackable. And we had great conversations in the list or inside of teams to be able to get to final titles to then get to information that people can then refer to. But it's just that easy to bring in an existing list. Even a list that's maybe years old will be available from SharePoint to bring in as a tab in Teams. The other thing I want to show you is if you create a list from a list, and we'll do it from that list that is in the background here, you'll see what happens. So if I go into now create a new list, and this time I'm going to create a list, and I showed you from a template before, which is now all the available templates are available to me even when I create a list in Teams. And I can create from a lot of the different ways, even from an existing list. So I'm going to create from an existing list. And that list is within this site, Next Gen Events, but I can go and navigate to any site that I have access to. If I know of a list that I really like and I want to use the schema or the formatting from it, I will do that. So we're going to choose from the Next Gen Events site, the 365 EduCon list, and we're going to use the formatting from that list to create a new list. So if I click Next, I can't use that same name, and we're just going to create this one as Orla from Shark Week. That's the name of our new list that's going to use the smarts of that existing list. Orla, do you have a favorite color that I can choose?
I think blue for shark.
Blue for shark. Okay, we'll go with regular blue for shark. And since from maybe where you live, you have to fly to go swim with the sharks, we'll give it an airplane icon. The thing that I want to call out here is when you create a list inside of Teams, if you notice, it doesn't ask me where do I want to create this, because it assumes it's going to get created in the connected team space, team site space. So it doesn't even have to ask, and you don't have to target it. It will create this in the SharePoint site, and I'll show you when we create it, where that actually gets stored. But for the end user, it is in Teams. I'm creating it as a tab in Teams. That's all they need to know. And when I click create, this will be the most uninspiring part of the demo. It gets stored in SharePoint, and I'm now started with all of the columns that I use and that you've seen me demo a little bit that are all there. That's great. It gives me a start with the columns, but there's a lot more to it than that. And again, I'm just gonna kind of cheat and give it a title. Orla, I wish you were here to choose, but I'll choose my other teammate that I demo from a lot, Chris. And Orla is going to be giving a workshop. So Orla, you're going to have to plan for a full day. We'll give you 7B, and we'll work on abstract together. I'll be your owner so that you have some support at this event. And if I were to go and fill out all the details, what I really want to choose is something to note that all of that formatting carried over. So if I choose Power Platform and I click Save, you'll see that Orla's first session now has the ability to be color-coded, which of course that didn't come through because I think I might have chosen the wrong one. But if we go back, oh, my color coding didn't come through. So part of that demo was to show you that the color coding comes through. Certainly, we'll add one more session. We'll call this Mark and choose the allocation of ODSP to see if that carried forward. So it just is on a list that I had forgotten to create that color coding for that Power Platform choice field, which is very easy to do, but I'll certainly save us a little bit of time and not dive into that. So you can see a lot of that formatting and smarts carries through. And if I want, anytime, if I want to create a rule that says something like when the status of allocation is, and we'll choose Power Platform just to give you a little bit, I want to send an information to the owner of that session so that they are aware of that session that's being created. So you have the ability to change the formatting, work with rules, to converse and to have a conversation around the list item. There's the full list experience to be able to create, view, edit, and collaborate. And that's all well and good, and that's all within inside Teams. So hopefully that's a bit of a window into lists in Teams. And next I want to show you the other half of the conversation of today's session is working with pages. I'm going to show you 2 pages that I have that I created that are just in the context of working on an event is the first one. And again, if I want to expand this a little bit, you can see the full immersive experience of SharePoint. But to the question that we got before we started the demo, what if I wanted to minimize the header? Here it obviously has a header, but what's missing, and is something that SharePoint does automatically now when you bring in a page in Teams as a tab, is I don't have that upper navigation and I don't have the left-hand navigation. So I am saving a little bit of space, and to the question that was being asked, it's a little bit of an indicator of the direction that we're going so that you have choices to show the navigation or not, to minimize the header or not, to move the left-hand navigation to the top or to not have any navigation at all. We're working on all those choices so that you can navigate and create and showcase the page in the way that you want to. But hopefully this gives you a little indication of what does it look like. And this page was one that I created when we were working on the MVP Summit that was just a couple of months ago or a couple of weeks ago. And this is just a simple page that has a text web part. It has a countdown web part. Obviously, the event is already in the past. I have a PowerPoint that I use to update my team so that they could see all the details of what was coming and they could refer back to it to navigate through the different timelines and milestones. And we had that all in a PowerPoint that we had and maintained the entire way through. We had a number of different meetings. This is a Teams meeting that I've now embedded that people can then go search through and navigate through. You can see it's just me walking through this PowerPoint and adding some context. And I also have some useful links. And in fact, I've embedded the list that I use to manage all of the different sessions that we held at the MVP Summit. And here it was just a little bit of a different format. But if you get a sense, these are the different items that I'm tracking here in Teams. And I can even add that list as a web part on a single page. And if you think about it, this is a tab within Teams that's effectively a page in SharePoint that I've designed to make it so that I can provide the context of everything you need to know to get ready for the MVP Summit. And I use this as a little mini dashboard for all of the speakers and support crew that are working on this event. And it's pretty easy to add it as a tab in Teams, just like any other asset in Teams. Let me show you one other page that I created, different scenario. And this is to basically learn and then converse and talk about internally about Microsoft Viva. Again, I'm going to show you this in the expanded view. So you can see that this page is a little bit different, where I'm using some elements to be able to collapse the different sections so that if somebody were to come to this and want to learn just about learning and topics to the Viva modules, they could go in here, kind of get the 101 elevator pitch of what is Microsoft Viva Learning. They could watch the video, they could see who the owner is, they can hover over them to learn more. And it's a very interactive dashboard of content. And in the context, you even see that it's pulling through some of the Viva Topics elements. So if I wanted to hover over something like Microsoft Viva, I can even see that this is pulling through a topic card inside a SharePoint page that's inside of Teams. And I may be rattling off a few things just to emphasize that this is a rich, powerful palette for you to design whatever it is that you want. You can have the header look as you wish. You can have the details and the content laid out in the way that you want. These are multiple vertical columns with sections, multiple horizontal sections. and alongside a vertical column. So you can maybe have the conversation from Yammer here on the right. You can have all of these different web parts laid out on the left, and you're getting this rich experience for when somebody wants to learn what is Microsoft Viva and how do I talk about it. This is our level 200 page that we created in a very different SharePoint site that's available to the entire company. And I just happened to add it as a tab in Teams, and it's just a SharePoint page on the back end. So how I did that, and this is kind of the cheat that I wanted to show you, is there will be an evolution of the SharePoint Pages app in Teams, similar to what we did with Lists, but right now it's oriented around to be able to add a page. And that's what I've done. I've added a page as a tab in Teams, but what's coming is this ability to use this experience to create a new page. Right now, it just has the ability to bring in existing pages. So if you imagine I were to go through this process using the SharePoint Pages app to create a new page, I'm effectively going to land on creating a blank page or creating a page from a template. And this is the page that I showed you when the individual asked to work with headers. How can you work with headers? So this is a very blank page inside of SharePoint, inside of Teams, that's stored in SharePoint. And again, if I expand this to get a little bit more room to work with, and I go into edit mode, or actually before I go into edit mode, I want to show you that it's really pulling through all of the elements that we have deployed here in Microsoft, because I've typed in OneDrive or SharePoint. You're starting to get this topics experience. So it really is pulling through the full value of SharePoint, especially as you design it, as you configure it. We have it configured with topics, so that's why you're seeing this up here. But if I go into edit mode, I'm starting to edit the page, and I'm just going to create a couple of sections. And in fact, I'm going to use 2 columns, and I want to go in and edit this section so that it has a little bit of a different look and feel. I'll go in and add 2 more columns and adjust the layout for that one to be a little bit more gray. And I want to add one more 1-column section. And I'm just going to start to add a number of different elements. I'm going to add the list that we started, which was for Shark Week, so that we track that on the page. I'm going to keep on the you might also be interested in. I'm going to add an element here that is just an image web part and add a quick image. Basically the first one that I see from one of our recent events. So now we have a new image. If I want, I can minimize that down. I can add a caption. This is from our AMA. And over here, I want to add a PowerPoint using the file viewer. I'm just going to go into my OneDrive and add this simple presentation. And I'm doing this just very quickly to showcase the ways that you can work to add content to adjust directly inside of Teams. And as it comes through, you'll start to see that even if I wanted to work on that top portion, I want to bring in an image from stock images. So if you know SharePoint, you know that we support a lot of these different thousands of images that you can use for stock photography. They're all accessible to you to use wherever you need to, even to the extent of being able to make sure that the focal point is right. Your title, you can change it. If you don't want to show who the author is, you can certainly make those choices. And I'll just say, hi, Orla, at the top here. That will show above, and I want to show the publish date, and on you can start to see that what I'm doing is working in a SharePoint page. And even to the extent if I wanted to work dynamically, I can certainly do that. I'll add Chris here as a collaborator. I'll add Naomi as a collaborator. And one more thing, just to show you the breadth of what you can do, is if I wanted to, you can even move things around to adjust the page, to adjust what it is that you see. That's not coming through, so we will minimize that one. And if I had adjusted this and of course spent a little bit more time, everything that I've been doing is being done inside of Teams. I can now republish this. If I want to, I can change the title of the tab to be something a little bit more fun. This might be our getting ready page. and I will use the page emoji. And as you can see, once this loads, we've created and effectively extended a SharePoint page directly in Teams. And before we run out of time, the 2 proof points that I wanted to show you is if I go back into this site, I give this a refresh. This SharePoint page now, of course, looks a lot different because we edited it and changed it inside of Teams. So if I'm working in SharePoint or I'm working within Teams, wherever I feel comfortable, but if you notice some of the Chrome that came back, that's because I'm in SharePoint. If I'm in Teams, it automatically removes them. But the real last proof point is all of this content that I've been working with inside of Teams to work with other people, to work with list items, to work with pages is all inside of SharePoint. And it all is inside of this specific SharePoint team site, of which our customers have, if not hundreds or thousands. So let's go look for that new Shark Week list. There it is. So if you know site contents, this just means that this list is officially and technically stored in SharePoint. We have one item when it was created, and if I were to click into it, this is that list in SharePoint. We have this list as accessible now as a tab in Teams, or if I were to go back to the Lists app, we now, I already showed you, have it as one list that I can access directly from my Microsoft Lists home experience. So a lot of different entry points, no matter where you're working, no matter how you're getting started or who you're working with, there's that value of working with SharePoint content in the context of Teams. And hopefully through today, you've seen working with lists and pages without any limit to what you can do, giving you that full functionality to get your work done. And this is where I'll pause. I know we're at time. And Orla, I certainly have time to cover questions. I want to make sure that we answer anything if people do have questions. And I'm just going to click off of this one and get back to where we were so that it renders a little bit more cleanly. But were there any questions that we can end with?
Yeah, there's one or two just come in here. Can lists be used in the whole hub, multiple sites?
Yeah, so the question around accessing a list or working with lists across multiple sites or within the same hub site. The main thing that you have to do if you want to do that, which is pretty common, is if I'm in a SharePoint hub site, which we are here, I'll go up to that parent level so you can see it. This is the home page of the hub site, and it has multiple sites underneath it, one of which is what I was on, which was that area where either I have that pitch of how to learn about Viva, or even my whole entire Intrazone site is nested under this hub site. And some of what you can do to align to this question is if within a hub site you want to have the same permissions, but maybe managed by different people, you at least have to have the availability for the same membership to be across different sites. So if in this hub site, we bring together a number of sites for the reason of being able to aggregate content to solidify a look and feel or a design across sites, and I have multiple lists, the one thing you have to make sure is that each site collection or each site under the hub site has the same level of permissions, at least from a view perspective. You can have different ownership, but if you want to have a list from one site either show up in the hub or show up across a different list and have that referenced in different teams' channels, you just have to make sure that the permissions, because we will always adhere to the permissions of the list, not to the permissions of the team. And just to hit that really clearly, this page I'm able to see, not only because I created it for this demo, but because I'm a member not only of the ESPC channel and of the Next Gen Events team, which is nested under the Next Generation Content Services hub site. I have at least a membership. I am a part of the member of all of those. I am an owner of the different sites that I own. So I own the Intrazone space, and this is that same list. If I were to send this as a link to somebody who was not a member of this team, they would not be able to see or render this list. So if I don't correct permissions, I can't make the experience what it is that the question is about, is can I have a list appear across sites or within the hub itself? And if you have adjusted permissions, the answer is yes. If you have not adjusted permissions properly for those that you want to at least have view access, then you won't be able to.
Thanks, Mark.
Yep.
Lots of comments here saying thank you and the presentation was excellent. I'll pick out one more question.
Yep.
Is it possible to set a page as default for a team?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things that we're working on is the concept around a connected template. And so there are ways to create a custom experience when you go. If I go into join or create a team and I go into create a new team, you can see that we've got a number of different templates available to us, and you can customize and make different templates available to you. And the area that we're investing in, one example, is this manage a project template. So if I create, and I won't step through this, but I'm just stopping here. If I go to create and click next, this is going to create a new team. It's going to have then generated a new connected team site, and both of them are going to get then updated with an existing template, a Teams template for project management and a SharePoint template for project management. There are specific templates available that are available to everybody. Those are default templates. And this just helps you in one step create everything together. And the reason I'm showing you is you can see that we even create a list. Now, because this is the project template and we want to go create all assets with available project templates, there's templates for projects in Teams, templates for projects in SharePoint. And in fact, we have a project-oriented template we call the work progress tracker. So this list gets created using the work progress tracker, and it gets added automatically as a tab in Teams, so that when I do click next and it does create everything, it does create all of those assets. It applies the templates and it adds elements as tabs in Teams beyond files and posts. So it'll pre-populate exactly how you would think as a template would. And so some of that is available to you. If you create a custom template, you can already do that today, but it does take that work to create a custom template. The other area where we have it available is if you don't yet have Teams connected to SharePoint, one of the choices when you go to add Teams capabilities to an existing SharePoint, effectively a group that is available, but before it was created before Teams existed, there's a choice to go through and add the different SharePoint elements as tabs in Teams, whether it's a page or a list. The files will automatically get created. And when you go to do that, you will then have those available as tabs in Teams once the SharePoint site is connected to the Teams experience. So those are probably 2/3 of what you hope the answer would be. The last third is just feedback that the team has gotten. I will let you know that if you wanted to, from the list, have more of a checkbox to add it as a tab in Teams, there is an experience that they're reviewing to move from SharePoint to a more easily to add it as a tab in Teams. But for today, it's a little bit more manual or as a part of a template. The extreme side is what I started with to show you there's a lot of moving parts and pieces that you also have control over. And if you go looking for it, it's called connected templates, some of which we've shipped, some of which is still coming. We'll make that announcement soon. But it does involve SharePoint templates, Teams templates, and list templates coming together. And it has that way of getting you started much more quickly, one of which is automatically adding the list as a tab in Teams.
Thanks, Mark. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. Thanks for an absolutely brilliant presentation.
You're
It was
welcome.
brilliant having you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me, and thank you everybody for your time. I wanted to leave with one, hopefully, pitch that I can make, if you don't mind, as you close out. There's a lot that we do throughout the year, and if you're looking to answer those questions like people had today, please lean on us. There is now a new feedback portal. If you have feature suggestions, we're active in the community on Twitter, in the Microsoft technical community. You can always ask questions to get the news and announcements, but absolutely attend these events in person, online. We like to participate. We love to get questions. We love to hear feedback. Thank you, Orla, for inviting me today. I will absolutely see you in November in person if you join the European SharePoint Conference in Copenhagen. But again, thanks for your time today, and thanks, Orla, for the support of the session today.
Thanks again, Mark. Thank you. Thanks everybody for attending. Take care and goodbye.